just in general, some of the key differences between North Carolina law and South Carolina law, specifically with regard to tort claims, which is, mostly negligence, as far as what we're going to be talking about.
Okay, well, I am licensed in both North and South Carolina. In fact, I practiced mostly in North Carolina before I got my South Carolina license back in 2006. There are differences, very similar. There are differences, but it's quite pertinent because being where we are in the upstate of South Carolina right now in Rock Hill, we have a lot of people who work in North Carolina, the Charlotte area, and so there's a lot of travel back and forth between the two states. So it's not unusual that we come across a lot of clients who either live here, but they had an accident in North Carolina or something else happened in North Carolina, so the case has to be filed in North Carolina. One of the things, the first thing I talk about is what dictates whether a case should be filed in South Carolina or North Carolina. Usually, if the accident itself occurred in North Carolina law is going to dictate what happens, and usually we file those cases in North Carolina, regardless of where the plaintiff or the defendant might reside. If the accident occurs in South Carolina, but the person who caused the accident lived in North Carolina, and our client lives in South Carolina, we're more likely to file it in South Carolina. So it's usually the point of where the accident occurs is usually the thing that I look at in terms of deciding where it's best to file the case. Now, in terms of actual differences, the first thing we can talk about is the statute of limitations. Every state sets their own statute of limitations, and that is how long does it take from the time I'm injured to bring an actual lawsuit, have to file it in court. In South Carolina, it's basically 3 years for almost any kind of tort action, any kind of accident, any kind of negligent action, and even a wrongful death action. You have 3 years from the date of injury to file it in court. North Carolina is basically the same except when it comes to wrongful death. In North Carolina, you only have 2 years. If the injury resulted in the death of the person, you only have 2 years from that death to file in North Carolina. So that's something we always have to be aware of when we look at and evaluate where the statute of limitation is where the injury occurred and what type of injury that it was. Apart from that, the negligence, the tort negligence itself in terms of duty of care and the breach of that duty causing an accident between the two states is pretty similar.
Right.
Where it becomes different again is in the nature of damages. And this becomes very significant when it comes to medical bills. In South Carolina, if the case were to go to trial, we can present to the jury the actual medical bills that were incurred by the plaintiff, the actual charges, regardless of if those charges were paid by insurance or were written off or anything like that. So the jury sees the actual charges that were incurred. North Carolina law does not do that. They changed the law a number of years ago. North Carolina only allows you to present to the jury what the outstanding balance is on those bills. And it can be a significant difference, especially if you had some bills that were written off or a lot of bills that were paid by insurance. And why that's important, rightly or wrongly, juries tend to look at medical bills and they kind of think, well, if the person incurred, the more medical bills they incurred, the more injured they must have been.
Right.
So if you have a lot of medical bills, the jury's more like at least going to enter into that with that thought in mind. And in North Carolina, they're not going to see that because of the nature of the law up there. So it makes it a little harder on the attorney in order to get the evidence of damages that the plaintiff suffered and the amount of medical treatment that they were doing. You can do all the treatment will come in. It's just the actual medical bills. And there's some variances to that in terms of what the court might allow and stuff. But that's the major difference between a case in North Carolina going to trial and a case in South Carolina going to trial.
Gotcha, yeah. Commonly called the collateral source rule.
Right.
We have it. They don't. I like it.
No.